everyone, this is Courtney from Ruby Red Farm. Today I'm going to be taking you through one of my more recent recipes that I started making on a regular basis, and that is one of my all-time favorites, chicken pot pie. So we're going to be making a classic version of this recipe with a double crust, lots of vegetables in there, really warm, savory flavor to it. I personally always end up using a whole chicken with this recipe. You can, of course, use a different option if that's not for you. We like to use our whole chickens though because it's a great way to use up a smaller chicken because you don't need quite as much chicken for this recipe as you do for a lot of others. This recipe is one that you're probably going to want to make on what my kids call a stay-home day. We end up using this more as a weekend recipe. It's not a great weekday recipe, although it is a possibility. It'd just be a lot harder to squeeze into a weeknight. So on our weekends, this is something that I've really started looking forward to making and started really making about once a month nowadays. It makes great leftovers, and my husband absolutely loves this recipe. Not too terribly technical, really more of an easy to medium difficulty recipe, just a lot of steps. So come along with me, I'll take you through the process, starting with the 2 pie crusts. Before we dive in, make sure to hit like and subscribe. I appreciate you guys watching. Now, for this recipe, I am going to go ahead and make these pie crusts, and then I need to refrigerate them for about 2 hours. Keep in mind that with this recipe, I'm starting with cooked chicken. So this morning, I went ahead and put that small chicken into the crock pot on low for about 5 or 6 hours. You can also bake or pressure cook your chicken. It's really your preference. But when you do go to actually make the filling, you want to start with cooked chicken for this version. If you don't have a whole bird available, chicken breast is going to be your best option for that more familiar flavor. So as I said, I've had my chicken cooking all day. I've actually turned off the crock pot now. I'm going to let it cool down while I make my pie crusts. So for these pie crusts, I'm going to mix my dry ingredients first. So we're going to be using 2.5 cups of flour. We like to use whole wheat flour in this house. 2.5. Next up, I've got 2 teaspoons of sugar and 1 teaspoon of salt. Gonna go ahead and mix these dry ingredients up. Then it's time for the butter. You do want the butter to be chilled. Ideally, you want it to come straight from the fridge, or you might even throw it in the freezer for a few moments just to really let it get as cold as possible. Because if it gets too runny, then it really just messes with the texture of this recipe. So let's cut up some butter. Now, when I'm doing this butter, I need 16 ounces, which is a full cup, and it's 2 sticks of butter. I like to cut mine into the smallest pieces possible. So in order to do that, I actually usually end up cutting this kind of into thirds. So I'm going to try my best here to get this cut into thirds. Does not have to be perfect, just trying to get it into the smallest pieces that you can. And then I turn it over and do that again. Now then I'm going to go through and end up essentially dicing this butter, and it'll come apart then into the smaller pieces as I mix it into the recipe. I'm going to continue cutting this up, tossing it into my flour mixture as I go. Does not have to be overly uniform, but you do want to try to get them all to be as small as you can, and then I'll repeat that on the second stick here. All right, so now that all of this is in here, if you have a big stand mixer, you can use the dough attachment and do some work on getting this butter in. I am not lucky enough to have one of those. I used to always just do it with a spoon, and then I would actually switch to my hand. I just recently, though, got an actual pastry cutter, and it does actually make a big difference. The way this works is you essentially kind of stab down into here, and you just do that over and over and over again until it all mixes together. You can kind of come at it from different angles. That's why I like this big wide bowl for this part, because it gives me a better chance to have something to smush up against. Every now and then I have to go in, tap off as much butter as I can, and then just get right back to it. This does not have to be completely combined, but you do want to get it to where there's no large pieces of butter left. It obviously, though, is going to melt as you cook it, and so you don't have to have it perfect, but you do want it to be relatively mixed in. If making a homemade pie crust is just flat out not your thing, you can, of course, buy a store-bought pie crust, skip this whole step. This is something that I feel is very important. We're trying to make as much of our own food at home as we can, and there's a lot fewer ingredients in a homemade pie crust, and obviously no preservatives. But if you are either physically unable, because this part's pretty physically straining. If you're either physically unable or just do not have the time or energy to mess with a pie crust, buy yourself a store-bought pie crust. Sleep easy at night. It is not the end of the world. And this chicken pot pie recipe will still taste great. All right, and that's your finished product. So again, definitely can still tell there's butter, but for the most part, it's going to be mixed all the way in now. Let's go ahead and get the cold water. So for the water, you want to use ice water and you need a half a cup. The way they want you to do it is fill this to half a cup, add an ice cube or two and let it sit for a moment. Take the ice cubes out and get it back down to a half a cup. The whole idea here is they don't want you to end up, for one, with ice cubes in your recipe, but they also don't want you to accidentally end up with 3/4 of a cup of water because you measured a half cup and added ice. I'm gonna add my 1 ice cube here, fill this up. I'm gonna take it to just above a half a cup here. Let this kind of settle for a moment. Our water runs pretty cold anyway because it's well water. Got my water nice and cold. I'm gonna go ahead and remove the last little bit of ice cube and get it down to a half a cup again. All right, for this step then, I'm gonna add the water slowly and stir as I go. So they recommend about 2 tablespoons at a time. So I like to add, stir it in. I'm gonna add a little more until I'm done. As you add and stir, you're gonna notice, of course, more and more, it's gonna start looking and feeling like dough. This is with about 1/4 of a cup added, and I'm gonna go ahead and add the rest now. We'll stir that in really well. Keep in mind with the dough, a lot of times you're more smushing as opposed to just stirring like you would a cookie recipe. This is another spot that you could use either a food processor to do or one of those fancy stand mixers that I do not have and quite frankly don't really want. I don't think I would want to clean it all the time. I do bake a lot, so maybe it would be worth it, but leave me a comment if you think I should get a stand mixer. All right, this is slowly but surely getting a little more solidified. And as that butter gets smooshed into the dough more and more, it's becoming solid. Once I see that it does kind of come together and stays together as I'm working with it, then I know it's ready. I'm going to lightly flour my workspace. Spread some flour out here. Use my hands to get this mixed up the rest of the way. Just to make sure all that butter really gets in there. If you have little kiddos, they'll love this step. Just make sure they've washed their hands. What I do then is I'm going to take half of the dough, form a pretty tight ball. I'm squeezing pretty firmly here. I'm going to set it down. Use my hands to kind of push it out into a disc shape. So this disc shape is going to be what goes into the fridge, and it'll make it a lot easier to roll out later. Go ahead and repeat that process with the other half here. And again, this part's messy. Just going to have to accept it. You don't want to use too much water. If you use too much water, you're going to end up with a really hard crust. So it is okay for it to be a little bit flaky and unstable. That's actually going to get you a better tasting crust. So again, just kind of spread this out into a nice disc shape. You're going to try to kind of hold the edges in as you go. And that is what you're going for. I do like to have one just a little bit bigger than the other, but it doesn't really make a huge difference. Next, I'm going to show you how to wrap these up and they'll go into the fridge. I'm going to get out a nice big piece of clear plastic wrap. Put one disc in, fold it up, and then put the other one on the opposite side. Fold it up. You want it to be pretty airtight. So you're going to get it around there, make sure it is nice and compressed here. And then this is going to go into the fridge for what they recommend is a minimum of at least 2 hours. For the chicken, I'm going to go ahead and get my fully cooked whole chicken out of the crock pot. Let it cool down for a minute so that my hands don't get burned. This is about a 2.5 pound chicken, which should yield me about a pound of chicken meat, which is what you want for this recipe. I'm going to use every scrap of meat that I can get off of here, so I'm just going to go ahead and shred this quickly. The bigger pieces like the breast and the tender, I probably will actually cut those just into more of a chunk shape. You want each piece to be about the same size just so that you're getting the same amount of chicken per bite. Shred this chicken and I'm going to go ahead and put it in the pot that I will be making my filling in. Again, as I mentioned earlier, if whole birds are not your thing, if shredding chicken and putting your hands on the chicken meat is really not your thing, then go ahead and just stick with either chicken thighs or chicken breasts. That'll give you the right kind of meat that you need. I suppose in a pinch you probably could buy pre-cubed chicken meat as well. It's still very hot. Go ahead and open that up, let it cool off a little bit. So again, as I go, I'm really more cutting the chicken and cubing it than shredding it. Of course, if you are using a whole bird, try to triple check that you're getting all the bones out of it. I think that goes without saying. I typically get all of the nooks and cranny areas first and kind of save the chicken breast for last. The chicken breast is the easiest part, so by the time I get, annoyed and tired of shredding a chicken, I can have the easy part as the only thing left. Don't know why that works, but it's a nice little trick that I play on my brain. Now you can make this recipe starting with raw chicken, and then what you'll do is for this next part, I'm going to be boiling a few things together in a pot. You can start that step with raw chicken and simply boil it about 5 or 10 minutes longer. Of course, just making sure that the chicken is cooked all the way through. I personally just really like having my chicken all the way done and knowing it's done, and then moving on with the rest of the recipe. All right, clean up my mess here. All right, next up I'm gonna add some carrot and celery to the same pot. My husband really does not like celery, and I'm not a huge fan myself, so I try to dice this up as small as possible. So I'll go lengthwise and cut this into about fourths, and then dice it very tiny. The celery is really more for flavor than anything, and so cutting it up small is not going to take away from what you're trying to do with this recipe. And I'll end up doing essentially the same thing to this carrot. Now I am going to end up adding some frozen peas and carrots here in just a little bit. So I end up cutting the amount of carrot in half, knowing I'm going to add a little bit more in a bit. So with the carrot, again, I kind of prefer to have very small pieces here. I try to cut this lengthwise all the way down, carefully. Okay, yeah, it'll be perfect, but trying to get that split in half. And then from there, I'll just kind of petite dice it. Again, feel free at this point if you want to use a food processor or a chopper or completely frozen prepared veggies that are out of the bag. All of that is fine. This recipe, again, really does have quite a few steps. And so anywhere that you can kind of take a shortcut, go for it. No judgment from me. All right, these all go into that same pot. At this point then, it wants me to cover everything with water, and I'm going to be putting it on the stove. Keep in mind, this step is really designed to cook the chicken, and it's already cooked. So I'm not going to put quite as much water, and I'm also not going to leave it on as long. We don't need the full 10 minutes of boiling in this step. I'm just going to boil it long enough to get some of the flavor in there. So we'll cover with water and boil for about 5 minutes. That's what's going in the pot, and that's what's going on the stove here. Got it on high, we'll let that boil. All right, while that's cooking, I'm going to go ahead and get the next ingredients ready. So I'm going to be dicing up a medium onion. Best way to do this, get the ends off, cut through vertically here, lay it face down, and then you're going to dice in a grid pattern. So I'll go through, carefully get this all chopped up. I'm going to go ahead and add that to a large skillet. Once my chicken is boiling, I'm going to lower that heat down to medium. To my onions, I'm going to add about a teaspoon of garlic and a third of a cup of butter, about 5½ tablespoons. Put that onto medium heat. And you're going to go ahead and melt all of that butter and saute this onion and garlic. Now you can use minced garlic for this step. I typically prefer powdered garlic, but it really doesn't matter. If you do use the powdered garlic, you might want to use a little bit extra because it's not typically as strong of a flavor. You're going to end up sauteing these until the onions are see-through. And once they are translucent, then you'll move on to the next part. Once those onions are translucent, you're going to go ahead and add a third of a cup of flour. Get the onions nice and coated with that flour, and then you'll add 1 3/4 cup of chicken broth, and then 2/3 of a cup of half and half. I ended up using half cream, half whole milk to get the same effect. You're also going to add in some seasonings, including 3/4 teaspoon of salt, half a teaspoon of pepper, and a full teaspoon of dried thyme. Whisk all of this together, and that's going to become your gravy for the inside of your pot pie. You're going to simmer this on medium-low heat until thick, just kind of stirring occasionally. As for my chicken mixture over here, I'm gonna go ahead and drain out all of the water and just set this off to the side. As this thickens, you can see it's gonna get a little bit thicker as we go. As it's reaching this stage, this is when I like to add the frozen peas. So I'm gonna add about a half a package of these just frozen peas. Nothing fancy, guys. Ending up with about a cup of extra vegetables added in. I do like to wait till the end because you don't want your peas to be mushy. So I'm gonna stir these in. This gravy is getting to where it is almost thick enough. I'm probably gonna let it simmer for just a little while longer, and then we'll start putting everything together. All right, once you've let this simmer down to where it's really pretty thick, then you're gonna go ahead and add the chicken to this gravy mixture. Stir everything together. And this is what's going on the inside of your pot pie. You can do a taste check at this point to see if you want to add a little bit more salt or pepper. Now is your last chance. But that is what's going to be our inner gravy. Delicious. Once your mixture is ready to go, you're going to go ahead and preheat your oven to 425. Let's get these pie crusts going. I personally do like to grease my baking dish. So I'll just hit it with a quick coating here, just to make sure it doesn't stick. I'm gonna lightly flour our workspace again and get out my pie crusts. So these have been in the fridge for about 2 hours now. You can keep them in the fridge for up to 5 days, or make them at the very least the day ahead. With this then, I'm gonna go ahead and roll these both out, taking my time, trying not to crack and get any problems on the edges. Just trying to get a nice clean pie crust. Trying to get this down to being really right around 1/4 of an inch, I would say. The pie crust recipe that I made, you should have plenty of crust available to make this recipe. So if you feel like you don't have enough, just keep gently rolling until it gets thinner and thinner. Okay. That's gonna be my top layer. Get my other one ready to go. Same process, just gently, carefully roll this out. Trying to be mindful of the edges as you go. Change directions a lot since it's a circle. The nice thing is this is a very forgiving process. You can always pinch things back together if you accidentally tear the crust. And on top of that, even if there is a gap in the crust, it's not gonna affect the flavor. It's just not gonna look quite as nice, but it really doesn't have to look nice. I care much more about how it tastes than how it looks. Go ahead. Make sure this comes up cleanly. Perfect. So I'm gonna grab my greased baking dish, set my bottom crust on here, try to get it pretty even and let it fall in. That should be about right. I'm gonna use my hands then and just kind of pinch this into place, trying to get it down into the corners relatively evenly and pretty snug in those corners, just so it bakes evenly later. So I'm gonna steal some crust from this side, bring it over here, just kind of pinch it into place. Trying not to press too hard. I don't want to completely harden this crust, but you do want it to be pretty set. Now, we're ready for the filling. Take this giant pot of filling. It's going straight down into here. So that is what my filling looks like down in there. I'm gonna now take my other pie crust, set it across the top, and try to kind of roll that and pinch it into place around the edges. You can use a fork as well to kind of smush this into place so that it doesn't go anywhere. Trying to really create kind of a closed edge, joining up with that bottom crust. I'm gonna roll that down, and I'll do that all the way around. All right, I am just 2 quick steps away from getting this into the oven. First off, I'm gonna go ahead and make an egg wash. So I'm just gonna take one of my really small eggs, and then maybe about a half a tablespoon of milk. Whisk that together thoroughly. This egg wash feels kind of like a silly step, but I assure you it really does make a huge difference. You're gonna notice a much better coloring to the pie crust. And then on top of that, it keeps it from burning and really just makes the whole process come together for a much better looking product in the end. Once I have this mixed, I'm gonna go ahead and coat it across the top. Making sure to get these edges as well. One last step then is to cut 2 slits in the middle. Try to use a relatively sharp knife, just to let it breathe and let air out as it cooks so you don't get a big bubble. All right, into the oven it goes, guys. We're gonna be baking this at 425 for about 32 minutes, and I'll show you guys the finished product here soon. All right, moment of truth here. Oh my goodness, that looks perfect. Let that cool off for a few minutes and I'll take a slice and show you guys how it turned out. All right, moment of truth. Oh, I like mine really crispy. It is perfect. This all butter crust really just makes the absolutely perfect crust. Gives it that real golden brown color, but it has a really nice flavor without being hard to cut through. So let's see how it looks. Oh, delicious. There's my finished product. Crispy golden brown, delicious savory inside. Let's see how it tastes. Again, don't forget, this makes really nice leftovers. This one slice here is more than enough for a whole dinner for me. It's very hearty. Very hot. Let's see what this tastes like though. Man, absolutely fantastic. Really a great source of vegetables. And again, you can kind of add the seasonings to your liking. You could add more garlic, more salt, more pepper. Really make it what you want it to be. A lot of people will sneak other vegetables into chicken pot pies as well. Treat it more like a stir fry, but just happens to get turned into gravy and put into a pie. Really, really big fan of this recipe. Hope you guys enjoyed watching this video. And again, please make sure to hit like and subscribe. Feel free to leave us a comment if you tried this recipe and ended up liking it. We always love hearing that feedback. Thank you so much for sticking around the whole video, guys. This was Courtney from Ruby Red Farm, and I hope you all have a great day.